Hello, I'm Bailey Leisure, and I'm back on my channel today as I'm giving my thoughts on the 2019 MLB Trade Deadline. As I'm recording this on July 31st, the trade deadline has come and went, and there were a lot of moves that happened. It was kind of a slow deadline up until the 4 p.m. Eastern time that the trade deadline came about, and there were a lot of big moves that happened. Especially after it hit 4 p.m. Eastern, and a lot of impactful moves, and I'm going to talk about and give my thoughts on those big moves. So to start off this video, I'm going to talk about one of the big sellers in the 2019 Major League Baseball season trade deadline, and I'm going to start with the Toronto Blue Jays. One of the bottom teams in the American League East, obviously not going to be competitive this year, and probably next year as well. They got a lot of great young players that they brought up on their roster. I think they've been, really focused on, building up that prospect pool and maybe competing in a couple years. They were big sellers at the deadline. One of the top targets in this trade deadline that was rumored to be on the trade block was Marcus Stroman, and they did trade him a couple days before the trade deadline, as Marcus Stroman was surprisingly traded to a non-contender in the New York Mets. Well, the Mets are about six and a half back of the wild card, but it was a surprise that the Mets went out and got him. The Blue Jays got prospects Anthony Kay and Simeon Woods Richardson from the New York Mets, so that was definitely a big deal, and I'll talk about that, the Stroman deal, in a minute. That wasn't the only deal the Blue Jays made. The Blue Jays traded Daniel Hudson to the Washington Nationals for Kyle Johnson. So that was another big deal. A lot of bullpen and pitchers that they traded at this deadline. David Phelps, the Blue Jays traded to the Cubs, and they also traded infielder Eric Sogard to the Tampa Bay Rays during a series in which they were playing the Tampa Bay Rays. So that was definitely that wasn't the only deal they made. They traded Anibal Sanchez, one of their starting pitchers, to the Houston Astros, and Joe Biggini. And they were big sellers. I think they like some of the they brought up Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and Kevin Biggio, and I think Bichette as well. They just brought him up. So I think the Toronto Blue Jays, I think it was good that they were sellers, and hopefully in the next couple years for them, they will be competing. So now we're moving on to the New York Mets, who were really weird when it came to this trade deadline. So the Mets, I look at as a roster, and I say that this team, I feel like they're managed badly, not only by their management, but their front office. They have a lot of talent, but they've either injuries or just they've not been able to get it together. Coming into this deadline, they're about 6 games back of the second wild card spot, and it looked like they were going to sell. Obviously, I think the 2 players that were rumored to be traded was going to be 3 players: Edwin Diaz, the closer, who's struggled since being acquired from the Seattle Mariners. Jason Vargas, Zach Wheeler, and Noah Syndergaard. Syndergaard's been rumored the last couple years, but the Mets decided to buy and trade as well. So they traded for Marcus Stroman. They gave up some of their top pitching prospects, as I stated previously with the Blue Jays, which was, now looking back, I don't think they gave up a lot for him, but it's just I feel like the Mets are very inconsistent. They're not even at 500 yet. I feel like they need to get to that just to be in the discussion for a wild card spot. I like the pitching staff. They traded Jason Vargas to the Phillies for catcher Austin Bozar. You got Zach Wheeler, who they didn't trade, although they were getting a lot of offers on him, but they didn't trade him, which was kind of a surprise. You look at the pitching staff. You got Syndergaard, you got DeGrom, you got Wheeler still, and you got Marcus Stroman. That's a playoff contender rotation. The problem I have is I think the lineup, they got some decent hitters, and Pete Alonso and McNeil, and Robinson Cano starting to pick it up a little bit, but their bullpen has just been a dumpster fire, and it's just struggled for so long, all season long. So I think it would have been better not to do a full-on, sell mode and just, blow everything up. But I think they should have traded a couple pieces to, I think they are, in a way. I think what they're trying to do is what the Tampa Bay Rays did last year, where they buy and sell a little bit. And maybe restocking for 2020, which is a possibility. And if they're going for that, then I think it's a good move. But I think time will tell. So one of the top starting pitching trade targets was Trevor Bauer. Now the Cleveland Indians are, I think, one of the wild card teams. They're not far back away from the Twins in the American League Central. Trevor Bauer's been their best pitcher, but it's been a lot of talk. Is he going to stay with the Indians beyond this season? Obviously, that his last start with the Kansas City Royals, where before he was pulled from the game, he threw a ball over the center field wall from the pitcher's mound. I think he apologized for that, but I think the Indians probably had enough of him. So the Indians traded him, and there were so many teams that were looking at him: the Yankees, the Astros, just a lot of teams. But the Cincinnati Reds, who are fourth in the division, decided to be buyers. But this is an interesting trade. So they got Trevor Bauer, but this is an interesting trade. So Cleveland, this was a 3-team trade, which is kind of a rarity in baseball. But the Cleveland Indians, they got Yasiel Puig from the from the Cincinnati Reds, and then they got Franmil Reyes and Logan Allen from the San Diego Padres. I think as well Scott Moss and Victor Nova, who are some prospects. So, and the Padres ended up getting from the Reds Taylor Trammell, who's a top outfielding prospect. But it's funny. So the last movement that Trevor Bauer made as a Cleveland Indian is throwing that fit and throwing that ball over the center field wall. Well, in the middle of Yasiel Puig had just been traded, and he was still on the field. Well, the Cincinnati Reds and the Pittsburgh Pirates were in a brawl, and Yasiel Puig was in the middle of it. He didn't start it, but he was in the middle of the brawl. He had to be restrained, so it's kind of weird. As far as this trade's concerned, Cincinnati, I think they're kind of like the Mets, how they're buying, and they possibly and probably are going to be, trying to compete for next year. So, I think Cincinnati, with Luis Castillo and Sonny Gray, I think they're setting up their starting rotation for the rest of this year and next year in a good position to compete. So, as far as the Cleveland Indians is concerned, I think they got a really good return for Trevor Bauer, getting Puig and Franmil Reyes and Logan Allen. I think those are some great players. I think even the Indians, with that trade, I think there's a chance for them to win the division and definitely be a playoff team, even if it's just a wild card, because I think their pitching staff is still great with Corey Kluber, Carlos Carrasco, if they can get those players healthy. They still got Shane Bieber, the All-Star MVP, and they still got Mike Clevenger. So the Indians, they traded their best pitcher away, but somehow they still got better even after trading them. So I think it was a really good move for the Cleveland Indians. So right now the big battle in the National League Central, other than it's really a 3-team race now. The Cubs, the Cardinals, and the Brewers. I think the Cardinals are leading as of the trade deadline on July 31st. The St. Louis Cardinals did not make that many moves at the trade deadline. They traded Jed Yurko to the Dodgers, but that was pretty much the only major deal they made. The Cubs didn't make a lot of deals, but they made some impactful ones. They traded Martin Maldonado, former catcher of the Angels and the Astros. He was on the Astros last year. They traded him back to the Astros for outfielder Tony Kemp. So, and also, Cubs got a pretty decent batter in catcher Nick Castillos from the Detroit Tigers, so that was definitely a big deal for them. As far as the Milwaukee Brewers are concerned, they got Jordan Lyles from the Pittsburgh Pirates for Cody Ponce. I didn't really think that was a great deal because his ERA in the last 4 or 5 games has been horrible, so that's not been great. And then they also traded former All-Star and a guy that's been struggling this year, Jesus Aguilar, to the Tampa Bay Rays for Jacob Faria. And I think this actually could be a really good deal for Jesus Aguilar. It could be a really good a change of scenery can help him out. But as far as between those 3 teams, I think probably the team that's the best and did the best coming out of the trade deadline, I definitely think was the Chicago Cubs. Moving on to the San Francisco Giants. So for the last couple weeks, the Giants have gone on a pretty good run, and I think it changed from them being sellers to being buyers. And I feel like they kind of did a little bit of both. They're only a few games back of the wild card, so they kind of did a little bit of both when it came to the trades. So they traded some of their relievers. They traded Drew Pomeranz, and Ray Black to the Milwaukee Brewers for Marcio Dubin, who's one of the Brewers' top prospects. They also traded, they traded Sam Dyson to the Twins, so that was a big deal for them. They also traded, I believe they traded Mark Melanson, and his contract to the Atlanta Braves. They also bought as well. They former All-Star Scooter Gennett from the Cincinnati Reds. They were able to get him. So it's definitely very interesting. They were definitely, a lot of people thought they were going to trade Will Smith or Madison Bumgarner. Bruce Bochy's last year as a manager before he retires. I feel like they could have gotten some really big prospects and really set up their future. But, you never know when it comes to this wild card. So I feel like I'm kind of 50-50 on them if they should have bought or they should have been sellers. I'd say I'm 50-50 with probably leaning towards selling, but they're only a couple games back, so you never know. So the Washington Nationals and the Atlanta Braves, those are the two best teams in the National League East. That's the Braves are winning the division as of recording this video, but the Nationals are one of the top wild card teams, and not far back, those were teams that bullpens needed to get better, and I feel like both teams were able to do that. So, the Washington Nationals got a couple pitchers from the Seattle Mariners. The Mariners traded Hunter Strickland to the Nationals for Aaron Fletcher, and they also traded were able to trade for Roenis Elias to the Nationals for Elvis Avardo and I'm saying this wrong, Taylor Guilbeau, I think that's his name. So meanwhile, the Atlanta Braves were able to trade for one of the top closers after Felipe Vasquez was not moved, but probably one of the top closers from the Detroit Tigers in Shane Green. So that was definitely a big deal for both those teams to get some reliever help. And it's going to be a tight race, and both teams are kind of back and forth, and I think it's going to be a very exciting race in the National League. Now we move to some of the big moves that happened towards the end of the trade deadline. So the Arizona Diamondbacks were coming as a 500 ball club, pretty inconsistent. I think Mike Hazen it was really in the coming days before the trade deadline, he was looking like he was going to be a seller. Restore their farm system and help them towards the future. The Diamondbacks were kind of coming into this trade deadline. The first couple moves they made, it looked like they were buyers. They got one of the top prospects for the Marlins, Zach Gallen, who's an MLB ready pitcher. He's looked pretty good in his few appearances in the majors so far this year. They traded him for the Diamondbacks' number one prospect, shortstop Jazz Chisholm, who's not done very well in Double-A. So I think everybody was looking at this deal saying the Diamondbacks got a really good deal. And then they traded for pitcher Mike Leake from the Seattle Mariners, only had to retain $6 million of his salary, from his big salary that the Seattle Mariners were paying from his contract from the St. Louis Cardinals. So, Mike Hazen didn't have to take on much. And then there was discussion, I think, throughout the day of the trade deadline, who were they going to move? Were they going to move Robbie Ray? Were they going to move Zach Greinke? Were they going to move both? There were reports going down that, the Diamondbacks were asking too much from the Yankees. They were asking for a top prospect, Clint Frazier, and some other, 3 prospects for Robbie Ray, which the Yankees didn't want to do. I think that was asking a little bit too much, but I think Mike Hazen knows the Diamondbacks have, in the past, with previous GMs, have undersold for certain players, like the Shelby Miller trade or the Touki Toussaint trade. So he knows, get more instead of selling for less. So, but then he made, just after the 4 p.m. Eastern deadline hit, he made the big one. He traded Zach Greinke to the Houston Astros for 4 prospects. He was able to go from paying for 2 years about $35 million, almost $70 million for 2 years, to being at divide up. He only has to pay $8 million for the next 3 years. And they got four prospects, including the 3, 4, and 5 top prospects from the Houston Astros. The Mike Leake deal, he only had to give up like an infielder. So Mike Hazen, he played this, for a seller, he played this this deadline perfectly. in my opinion. He traded, he got rid of Greinke's contract. He fixed the farm system, not only between this and the draft, MLB draft. So the problems and the things that were hindering the Arizona Diamondbacks when he got here, he's been able to improve on, and that's a big thing for Mike Hazen. Is really setting up the Arizona Diamondbacks to compete in the next year or two. I don't think they're going to compete this year, even though they're 3.5 games back. I think there's so many bullpen issues that I think that prevents the Diamondbacks from being at least a playoff team. But the Arizona Diamondbacks are really set up well in the next coming years. So I think Mike Hazen's got a future for the team, and he's setting up that team very well. So now we're moving on to the Astros, and the Astros, have gone from, I think they were one of the favorites in the American League before this trade deadline. I think the one thing people were asking for and what people wanted to see them get was another starting pitcher. They were linked to Madison Bumgarner. They were linked to Trevor Bauer. They were linked to Zach Wheeler. Well, they got a bigger one, probably as big as, maybe not as big as Bumgarner, but a big one that's done very well. And they got Zach Greinke. They did have to retain, I think, about $50 million of that out of that deal. And give up a couple prospects, but a lot of teams didn't buy that should have bought or should have made this impactful of a deal. And I give the Astros credit; they did that. Not only they did that, they got Aaron Sanchez, another big starting pitcher for the not the Atlanta Braves, the Toronto Blue Jays. So that was definitely a big deal. So you're looking at that starting rotation. They're not only the heavy favorites in the American League, I think they're the hands down the favorites to win the World Series this year. You look at that 5-man rotation. You got Justin Verlander as your number 1. You got Garrett Cole as your number 2. Zach Greinke's your number 3. Greinke could be your 2 or 1 on a lot of teams. Probably your number 1 for a team like the Diamondbacks or the San Diego Padres or the Colorado Rockies or something like that. Wade Miley, who could be number 1 or number 2 on a lot of different teams. He was the number 1 probably for the Milwaukee Brewers last year. And then Aaron Sanchez. The only kind of question mark is the bullpen, but I think they'll, with that starting pitcher, and then you look at that hitter lineup, which is just as good as your pitching staff. So the Astros, I think, are the most complete team going into the trade going into the playoff push and for the World Series. And hats off to them. And I don't know who can get past them, especially considering the moves that the Yankees and the Red Sox did not make. The winners and the losers of the trade deadline. Starting off with the winners, number 1's definitely got to be the Astros. I definitely, that speaks for yourself. Getting an ace like Zach Greinke and just that starting rotation. Good luck with that in the future. It's not a guarantee, but the Astros, they're the heavy favorites in the American League. The Arizona Diamondbacks, I think Mike Hazen, getting what he got for Greinke, getting what he got. For the Marlins, and getting Mike Lee kind of on a cheap deal, didn't have to give up too much. I think that helps them out, and he's able to, the only contract that's really hindering them is the remaining money that they gave to Greinke, which he decreased, vastly, and probably the Yosmani Tomas contract. But he repaired the farm system this year, and he freed up some cap space some payroll. So, the Diamondbacks, got some options for what they want to do with that freed up payroll in the coming years. I'd say 3 or 4 would be the Atlanta Braves and the Washington Nationals. They needed a bullpen. I think both teams got really good bullpen help, so that's going to help them out, as they're probably going to be the biggest threat to the Dodgers in the National League. And then the Indians, I think, what they got for Trevor Bauer and how they really improved their team despite trading away, hands down, probably, or at least debatably, their best starting pitcher. So I think the Indians, they played this trade deadline very well. And then we move on to the losers. The Yankees, I think, are number 1, considering that, they've had so many starting pitching issues with the injuries and just, it's a lot of inconsistency when it comes to their starting pitching. They got a great lineup and they got great bullpen, but, starting pitching you definitely need, and I feel like they did not improve that when it came to the trade deadline. I know the Diamondbacks asked for too much for Robbie Ray, but they could have went after Zach Wheeler, they could have went after Bumgarner, they could have went after anybody, and they just didn't do that. I don't know why this team took a chance or didn't take a chance. Excuse me. The Dodgers, I know it's complex. I know the Pirates were asking a lot for Felipe Vasquez, but that's the biggest flaw for the Dodgers going into the postseason is their bullpen. And Kenley Jansen's not locked down as he used to be, and I think you would love to get like even a Shane Green from the Tigers, so you have some insurance if Kenley Jansen goes into the postseason and he's struggling. If he's not doing well, you could throw somebody else in, and I feel like the Dodgers did not do that. And that was a big reason why I think they lost last year's World Series was, their bullpen just collapsed. The St. Louis Cardinals, considering what the Cubs and the Brewers did, they didn't really make that many moves when it came to the trade deadline. The Red Sox, they didn't make a lot of moves either, and neither did, I think the Tampa Bay Rays were probably the most aggressive when it came to the trade deadline in the American League East. And the Giants, I feel like they really probably could have sold, especially for Bumgarner, could have gotten a great return for him, and it's not even a guarantee. I don't even think Bumgarner's going to be back at the end of the year. So I feel like they're kind of hanging on to what's left of that core roster that's won multiple World Series. Who are the winners and losers of the 2019 MLB Trade Deadline? Who do you thought should have been moved? Who do you thought shouldn't have been moved? Were there other trades that I did not talk about? Leave that in the comments section below. As always, follow me on Twitter at BagleyLaser96. Click like if you like the video, and subscribe if you like the content on my channel. So thanks everybody for watching, and I will see you all later.